All right, Steve, what's up, brother?
How's it going, Alex?
Yeah, so we're gonna do something a little different today. We've done a couple dozen episodes this year, and we've learned a lot. So I wanted to put a bow on some of the things that we learned throughout this year, because there was a lot of topics that came up over and over again. And this is partially something for our listeners to go, oh yeah, Alex says that all the time, but also partially something for myself to cement the things that I've learned, put them down onto paper, and get the chance to talk to you a little bit about them and see what you think, my man.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we'll fire it up. So the first one, the fast way is the slow way. I see so many entrepreneurs who bounce from one thing to the next over the span of a few years and don't make any headway whatsoever. You have a semi-successful thing going, but get distracted by this new thing that has more, quote, potential. More entrepreneurs have failed from jumping around from thing to thing than have ever failed through staying at something for too long. Everyone says they want to get rich. They don't. What they actually want is to get rich quickly. That's why people invest in Bitcoin. That's why you will far more often read a story about a person who won a big parlay bet than you will the plumber who invested in his 401k for 40 years and retired with $5 million. If you really wanted to get rich, you would jump from sales job to sales job, where the commission structure and item you are selling become increasingly more expensive. But no one wants to do that, and almost no one does. People simply demand raises, buy meme stocks, or play the lottery. The fastest growing company in America in 2022 was BlockFi, a crypto exchange. It grew 245,000%. 2 months after the Inc. magazine article came out naming them the winner, they filed for bankruptcy. The fast way is exciting, but if you live by speed, you can die by speed. We all verbally say we want to be rich, but we never specify a timeline. The undercurrent is that we want it to be now or in the next few years. Because we live in a social media world, most people assume they can learn anything in 30 minutes. What they fail to notice is that the people who are out doing it have been executing for the last 30 years. Maybe the old guards missed something that the new generation picked up on. Or maybe they're so disinterested in the up-and-comers they fail to care because they realize how hard it was to actually accomplish what they did. You aren't coming for them. You're still 20 years away. We fail to remember Amazon started in 1994. Tesla started in 2003. Google started in 1998. If they got distracted midway along and started something different, we wouldn't know their names anymore. Charlie Munger said, "You don't have to do extraordinary things to achieve extraordinary results." That's coming from a guy who started investing in the 1950s and 60s. Stay at it for a long time and become great. The rest will mostly sort itself out. The slow way is the fast way.
Yeah, man. And I think that's pretty evident, especially in the space that we're trying to occupy right now with the podcast. Mm-hmm. And we want that overnight success, but how many flash in the pan podcasts have we seen just kind of like spring up and then disappear forever because they're trying to cut corners?
Yeah, and I mean, it's written right behind us that to become a 1% podcast, you just have to make it to episode 21. So many podcasts don't even make it to episode 3. So that's kind of like an example of the way our culture is. We're so fast paced. We're just like now. And then people get going. They're like, oh, this is like a little bit more difficult than I thought it was going to be. And I have so many friends that are entrepreneurs, you know, they start as car detailing and it's going well. It's working. They're making money. And then they're like, oh yeah, I stopped doing that. And now I'm selling windows. And then you talk to them again, like 6 months later and they're like, oh yeah, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm selling solar. Look, I get it. There is some value at moving from a low value job or proposition to higher value, but sometimes you're just moving to move because you're not rich yet. So you're like, I need to change something. It's like, well, you gave it a year. So
that mindset of maybe it's over here. No, maybe it's over here. Yes. Maybe it's over there.
Yes.
And yeah, I think we touched a little bit on that with Catherine Klein's episode and her owning a creative temp agency. That you kind of see that a lot just kind of within temp agencies, is people moving from one place to another, like sometimes days, sometimes weeks after starting something new.
I think it's across so many different industries, man. And people, again, they've just become programmed by TikTok and social media. You just want to go fast, fast, fast. And you hear these stories, you see these individuals that make it. And that's kind of what I commented on. You get so excited when you hear about Snapchat because, well, now that's like a decade plus old company. But that was the story for them, is that like in 18 months, they went from starting the company to billionaires. That's super exciting, but that's survivor bias. You heard about that story because they made it to that place. The 99% plus companies that were similar to them didn't make it, and they just failed and flunked out. So
right. But then you also said something pretty interesting about the newer generation kind of thinking that they've got an edge on the old guard because of some piece of information that they think that the old guard doesn't know about. And you can kind of go back to that Snapchat example. As an example of that, Snapchat was this really fast success story. And even in the internet age where everything still is very new, there's still old guards in the internet.
True.
Who was the old guard when Snapchat was becoming new? Instagram.
Yeah.
And what did Instagram do? They basically copied Snapchat's model and put Snapchat right back, not out of business, but kind of in their place.
Definitely kind of little bro them. There's no doubt about that. But again, for people who are out there listening, business owners, people looking to, obtain wealth, people looking to obtain skill, I just think that you have to remember the fast way is the slow way. If there was a shortcut in a certain thing, it lasts for an extremely short amount of time, and then those holes end up getting plugged. Yes, you could have bought Bitcoin in 2009, and it would have been an extremely successful investment, but those are extremely few and far and rare. So to think that the next thing you're going to do is your Bitcoin.
Yeah, and even back then, like, who could have predicted that, 8-9 years later, that Bitcoin would have become what it became. Mm-hmm. So all those people who were kicking themselves in the butt for not doing it, there's a ton of those stories. But then there's also a ton of stories where someone bought a ton of Bitcoin back like over a decade prior. And then when it came time to cash in, they're like, oh, I completely forgot I had that. What's the password? How do I access this? And then it's still lost forever.
I mean, this is something I really got from Munger, and I referenced him and Buffett. Unfortunately, Charlie Munger just passed away a couple of weeks ago. But they would say, don't buy a stock unless you're prepared to hold it for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people who bought Bitcoin, and I'm not intending to make this conversation about Bitcoin, but they bought it and then they sold it 2 years later, and they're like, oh, this is great. I made 200%, which is pretty good. But yeah, they didn't have the wherewithal to hold that for a decade or 2 decades or 5 decades.
Yeah. And there's a really funny story. I was listening to the radio, I believe it was on when I was just waiting to go into the office a couple years ago. There was a guy who was reaching out. He had, I think, over $250 million worth of Bitcoin in an account that he had purchased back in the day. He could not remember the password. He was on his last attempt before his access was denied forever.
I remember the story, yeah.
Yeah. And he was reaching out to anybody who could like help him out to possibly get into that money, because he had over $250 million in Bitcoin just sitting there, and all he needed was that password, and he would have changed his life.
An expensive lesson to remember your password.
Yeah, write that stuff down.
All right, second. When everyone zigs, you may need to zag. It's possible to become successful following along with the crowds. You can build a pretty good life being the 50th best dentist in Columbus, the 100th best lawyer in Minnesota, or the 200th best financial advisor in Orlando, but you can't become extremely wealthy by following the crowd. Most of the most successful people that I've spoken to have all said the same thing. When everyone was going in a certain direction, maybe the other way is what you should be doing. You can't just be a contrarian, though. You have to be a contrarian and be right. A contrarian who is permanently following the opposite of what everyone else likes is just a conformist by another name. You have to find the avenues where you can go the other direction and have success. Fortunately, there will be far fewer people to compete with you when you don't follow the crowd, and you will readily stand out. This is how Michael Burry capitalized on the 2008 financial crash, and this is how early investors in Bitcoin were successful. This is how Joe Rogan built a podcast empire when people thought he was just talking to his friends and wasting time. If you trust your gut, most people generally do not care what you are doing. Follow your instincts, disregard the perceived input of others. They generally only care about themselves, and feel free to zig when others zag. You may fall flat on your face, but you also can't become a billionaire without it.
It's a lot of lessons to take away from that one.
I mean, this is something we heard from Coyote Peterson. This is something I heard from Dave Winham. This is something I heard from Ben at Earthly. Something we heard from Catherine. Something we heard from so many of our guests, that they said, everyone wanted me to do X, but I just didn't feel right for me. So I went and did Y. And again, it's pretty hard to become ultra successful by following the crowd. Again, you can do well, but a lot of the people that we've met, they said, I'm going to try my own thing. I mean, Jeff Bradshaw, he goes, everyone wanted me to sell online. He's like, now we have 17 retail stores. So it worked out for those folks. And obviously those are smart folks, and there's a survivor bias to that. But I think there's something to be said that if you follow the crowd, you can't become extremely and extraordinarily successful. You can only be as approximately successful as the crowd. Yeah.
I think Joe Rogan is a very interesting example of that, just because when you hear him talk about it, he wasn't trying to be successful. You'll hear him say multiple times in a wide number of episodes that he's never promoted the podcast. He never did any of that. It really was just him sitting and talking to his friends, and it evolved into what it evolved into just because he was staying true to himself and just wanting to have fun.
Yeah, trusting his instinct.
Trusting his instinct.
You know, he went, look, this is what I want to do, and this is what I feel like works, and this is what people listen to, and they listen to me because I do what I want to do, and I don't fall into the trap of fitting into a box. And there's so many TV shows and podcasts that it's like, yeah, well, we fit this into the box, but they're not having that extraordinary success. Why? Because, again, you can't do what everyone else does and get extraordinary results. It just, the math doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, and now I think following that old path of what, has been laid out before is kind of almost detrimental.
Yeah.
Ironically, there's an episode of Joe Rogan recently where he was talking about if you're a comedian and you do these late night spots on these talk shows that for the past 30, 40 years have been the staple and the cornerstones for a lot of people's careers, it's net neutral at best. Like, it does nothing for you anymore. So you almost you're forced into doing something that is more just authentically you, that you're interested in. And that authenticity then leads into the success that you might be looking for.
And it's so difficult because there's an opposite side of this coin where it's like you're just not listening to what people are telling you and you're being an idiot. And like, hey, I've been in business in this industry for 10 years and I'm telling you that this is going to be a helpful maneuver. And you go, yeah, I'm just going to figure it out myself. It's like, okay, well, I don't know if that's the way to do things. But everything in life that's difficult is balancing on the edge of two extremes. So you can either A, not listen to anyone and take no one's advice, or B, take everyone's advice and just follow that like linear path. Like my dad wants me to be a doctor. It's so hard to find that balance. But generally, I think, we've seen from a lot of folks, if the world's zigging, maybe you should zag.
Maybe. And it's a scary thing to do sometimes because, sticking with the plan, so to speak, can be pretty safe and comfortable feeling. And there's a lot of stability in that route.
Yeah.
But
yeah, well, when it comes to like outside people looking at your decisions, if it's an independent decision, I kind of say it there. We make a big deal thinking that people care about the decisions that we make. But the reality is that people care about themselves 99 times more than they care about your little one. So what Steve is doing, like, with like your band, like you posting videos, or us with the podcast, like 1% of our crowd cares. The other 99% doesn't care. And that 1%, I'm sure they would care a lot more if something was happening to them in their life. And there's sort of a thought experiment. Maybe I said this on the podcast once, but Adam Smith, the economist, he said, there's a hurricane and 10 million people have just died in Asia. You're like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. That's so bad. And then your doctor calls you and he goes, Steve, I'm sorry, but tomorrow you're gonna have to go in for surgery. You're gonna lose one of your fingers. The 10 million people that just died in Asia, you're like, forgot about that. Like, I'm about to lose a finger tomorrow, but it's a finger. And 10 million people just died. But we're so self-centered and we're wired to be that way that you're not that worried about the 10 million people anymore. You're thinking about what's going on in your life.
Yeah, and I think that also could be applied to something else we talked about on the podcast, the perceived stigma of starting a business and having that business fail. Because we're so worried about what other people are going to think if the business doesn't make it, that it scares us from either starting or starting again if it does fail.
Don't worry, I'm going to get to that one.
Oh, okay. Spoilers.
Learning how to have hard conversations is a superpower. Almost everyone is terrible at this or totally avoids it. Managers have no idea how to reprimand or correct their employees. Employees have no idea how to tell their supervisors that they're offended or that their actions are hurting the department. And significant others won't bring up even the most basic things until they have to. You aren't doing anyone a favor by not telling them that they have something in their teeth. You're only protecting yourself from the possible pain of having a discussion with someone that may be uncomfortable. Become comfortable with uncomfortable discussions. Avoiding them only makes it worse. Unset expectations are just future resentment. Additionally, approaching someone in a way that puts them on the defensive is certain to accomplish nothing other than an argument. You can be right and be an asshole at the same time. How you deliver the message will dictate if it's heard. Do this wrong, and even the most logical and correct input will be discarded. Do it correctly, and someone will believe almost anything you tell them. Having the hard conversation is hard and takes practice, but it's a certified superpower that can be learned.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because you're absolutely correct. You can be right and an asshole at the same time, but deep down, like, I feel like most people don't want to be an asshole.
I think so many people just don't know how to deal with, like, hey, this conversation is going to be difficult. So how do I deliver it? And a lot of people just don't prep, but I was just getting, I was checking out in line at Chipotle 3 or 4 days ago, and I ordered double meat on my burrito, and I get to the checkout line and the young man checks me out, and his manager walks over, and she's a gal. She's maybe like 30, 25, 28, 30, somewhere in that range. And she goes to him and goes, "You have to pay attention. I yelled at you that this was double and you didn't clock it in right. Oh. And when you do this, the company thinks that we're stealing, and I don't want to be on the hook for that. You have to listen to me."
Oh man.
And she walks away. And the kid actually, like, he took it pretty well. But I leaned into him and I was like, she might be right, but she also might be an asshole. And he laughs, and who knows what he takes from that. I mean, I'm sure he just thinks like, oh yeah, well, my manager is an asshole. But to that point, she might have been right that he wasn't listening. He wasn't paying attention, but the message that you send is not, hey, I really need you to correct this behavior. It's that you don't pay attention to me. You're not good at your job. You're terrible. I'm the boss. You need to listen. I need to raise my voice to get things done. And it's just not conducive to a positive work environment. And I would make the case that it's completely unmanagerial.
Oh yeah, it's really just bad leadership. And I'll tell you this much, kudos to that kid, because as soon as someone starts clapping while they're talking at me, I'm done listening. Yeah. I'm staring off. I'm somewhere else in the universe. I'm just not there in that moment. So whatever you're saying, save your breath, because it's going nowhere with me at that point.
And I am shocked at how many people communicate like that. I'm shocked when I hear like couples communicate like that. I'm shocked when I hear managers and managees and employees communicate like that, because business communication is just communication with a specific set goal in mind. Mm-hmm. So if I send you an email, an intercompany email, I'm trying to accomplish something. I'm trying to make you aware of a new policy, new procedure. I'm trying to ask you what's going on with this vendor, right? The goal is to get information or move something along. Mm-hmm. So when you communicate with someone like that in a business, her goal was, I want to make him aware that he needs to listen. Yeah. But your actual like result was, now he like resents me. Now he's maybe scared of me. And now, like, if he does listen, he listens out of fear. And it's hard to rule by fear for a long period of time, especially with someone who can go, forget you, I'm quitting this job.
Oh, for sure. And, you know, this is no shade on anybody who works at Chipotle, but if you're working at a Chipotle, especially if you're like a younger kid, you know, this is an entry level job that you're going to have a future somewhere else. So it's like, there's no fear coming out of that. And all you're doing at a management level is alienating your crew underneath you. And that's just going to cause them to leave.
Yeah. You know, even if I was coach of a football team, I would not speak to someone like that, just because again, I don't think that you're getting what you want to accomplish across.
Well, unless you know, you listen to Coach Jeremy and that's authentically you and that's how you talk to people, that could be a very effective coaching style.
The backside of that loving slap is that he actually loves and cares about you.
Yeah, and that's what needs to come through.
And he will show you that. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to have good leadership without the support of your team underneath you.
Absolutely.
If you're not leading anybody because no one wants to listen to you, then you're not in a leadership position.
And what I tell people all the time is you have a finite amount of leadership capital, right? So like if I'm managing you, Steve, and what you don't have your top buttoned at the job, and that's really kind of part of the policy. I can either be like, hey, Steve, we need you to button that top button, or I can save my leadership capital for something that's a little more important, where it's like, Steve, you were late today, and that's actually more important to us. I can't just keep wearing you and grinding you down. Like, you need to do this, and you need to do that, and you need to do this, and you need to do that, and you need to do this. Because eventually people are going to be like, man, my manager is just like crazy strict with us. And, you know, even some policies that are in place, it's like, how important is this for me? And I'm not saying let your people do whatever they want, but
kind of choose your battles.
You got to choose your battles, and you got to realize when, you know, by me accepting like, hey, look, this is kind of Steve. This is who he is. This is his personality. He's a great employee. Like, I don't
showing off that chess piece.
I don't need to battle him on this. You know, it's not going to help me in the overall ability to manage this employee. So use your leadership capital wisely.
That's a good one. Leadership capital.
4, reading is essential. Americans are reading fewer books than ever, down in 2022. Almost half of Americans say they haven't read any of a book in the last year. Men are less likely to read than women. Most people read less than 5 books a year if they read at all. Less than half of all the books read are nonfiction. In essence, almost no one is reading anything, and if they do, it's probably fiction. The smartest people in the world read an extreme amount. Warren Buffett claims to read 6 hours a day. Naval Ravikant says he has 50 books open at any given time. There's a special type of effort it takes to read a book, one that is not present in audio or podcasts. You have to slow down, be present, and, quote, work to absorb the information. How many hours of podcasts have you listened to that you can maybe only cite a few facts? If you read one great book, it may change your whole outlook. The competition to become smarter and more thoughtful is woefully low. Just read a few nonfiction books a year and you'll outpace 99% of the population. Naval says to read what you love until you love to read. That's great advice to get started because reading is essential.
I got to say that's one I'm not the greatest at.
I got this from Bryce Calvin. He, really drilled into me. He didn't even really have to say much about it. I was just scrolling his Instagram and he had a picture of probably 30 or 40 books stacked on top of each other. And it said oh, these are all the things that I read this year. And I was like, I know he's not trying to flex and he's not trying to show off. That's not him and his personality. But it showed me, I was like, he's a business owner. He works out. He's got a great physique and he still finds time to read. So clearly it's important. And he told me, he's like, yeah, it's like the best thing that I do every day. He said, he's like, I'm a morning person. So I wake up 2 hours early and I just start reading. And he's like, it's the best thing that I do all day. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And for me, so I started to implement this. I said, look, my goal is 12 books a year, which is not a lot. It's 1 book a month, but I'm going to well outpace that. I'll probably read, 20 to 20 plus, somewhere in that radius. Not 30, but more than 20. And the amount of info that I pick up from reading a book is just so impactful. It's not to say that it's more impactful than a podcast. Not to say it's more impactful than an audio book, but again, there is that level of effort. So, I have my most success reading in the bathtub, honestly. You know, that's what I do, and I love it. I have so much fun doing so, and I'm excited that I was able to kind of pick up on this thing. And it is a thing that once you pick it up, it's not going to go away. It's a little bit like fitness. Once you fall in love, you're like, oh, yeah, I'm going to do this the rest of my life.
Yeah. I was actually just about to ask if audiobooks count, but
I think they count.
It's not nothing.
But I would say I have picked up on reading physical books more this year. And I'm not counting that in my like 20 books. Those are all just physical books that I've read.
I think there is something to that. Just the physical act of picking up a copy of a book and just setting aside all of the distractions. It's a good exercise in itself just to do that and just focusing in on what's in front of you. These words on this page.
Yeah, and I don't read a ton of fiction. I would say my goal at all times is to have 3 books open. I have something that's nonfiction, the kind of personal development, history, and then one that's fiction, but more like a classic fiction. I'm not just like reading like whatever, like the pop stories that are out there right now. So I'm reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy right now, which is a classic, you know.
That is a good one.
It's very good, you know, and it's short, and I think there's a sense of accomplishment I get when I finish a book. I'm like, sweet, you know, boom, clicking through them. So it's a habit that I'm going to try to keep going in 2024 on and increase because, you know, there's a lot of information to be learned from books that it's difficult to pick up in any other way.
Yeah, for sure.
5, most humans have a terrible time understanding risk to reward. Learn this skill to become more successful in all walks of life. The brain has a hard time understanding that on every roulette wheel spin of $5, you are expected to lose $5.26. Casinos and sports betting apps play on this misunderstanding. When it comes to most things, you want to analyze your risk to reward on the topic. This lens is helpful to look through for any action. In trading stocks, options, or bonds, you want to bet small to win big. Minimize the risk of blowup. In life, you never want to risk anything too large, like your own safety. Driving fast may be fun, the reward, but the risk, death or an accident, is quite high. That's like a gambler betting $1 million to win $5,000. Sure, it's pretty low risk that they will lose and make the $5,000, but there's a definite non-zero chance of losing. To win a bet like that, the gambler needs to win more than 199 out of 200 times to be positive. And crazy things happen 1 out of every 200 times pretty often. When it comes to life, we overstate that our reputation will be ruined if we approach a cute person in a bar. We overstate embarrassment if we start a business and people online think we are dumb. We overstate the idea that anyone cares what we do online or how our photos look or if we sound dumb. No one really cares. We overstate the idea that starting a business could lead to financial ruin. Generally, there are a lot of safety nets in place, including friends and family, couches we could sleep on. We're designed to see the negatives or downside in situations. That's what helped us avoid tigers when we were evolving. Now those same circuits are trying to help us in an environment that isn't the same. We aren't going to embarrass ourselves in front of the tribe, and our stress doesn't constantly need to be high, assuming a lion is coming for us. Understand what is a real risk and understand what is one we are wired to believe is a risk.
Yeah. I think it was Christian's episode where we talked about that gambler who bet it was over $1 million, and if he would have won, it would have only been like, what, 11?
Small fraction, you know,
it was like
couple $1,000.
Couple $1,000 a gain against $1 million that was risked, and he ended up losing that bet.
He did. Yeah, and that's essentially the opposite way that you want to think about risk to reward. He bet an enormous sum to win a tiny little amount. So Christian would always be like, look, you want to do the opposite. You want to bet that small amount to win that big amount. So, you know, when it comes to options or stocks or gambling, that's kind of a good way to think about it. But at the same time, that applies to life. You don't want to go into something and be like, yeah, I'm betting everything and my reward is a kind of a small thing, right? So again, the analogy of driving fast, like, oh, I'm going to drive at like 150 miles an hour. What's the reward? Well, it's like kind of fun. Like, I'm not going to tell you it's not fun.
It's a lot of fun.
What is the risk? Oh, the risk is that I die. And it's like, well, what is worth the risk of you dying? Like, if I told you there's a 1 in 10 chance if you drive 150 miles an hour, you're going to die, you'd probably go, yeah, 1 in 10 is kind of high. Yeah, I don't know about that. 1 in 100 is kind of high. 1 in 1,000 is kind of high. 1 in 10,000 is kind of high because you can't come back from that risk.
No.
You know? So then we overstate the things in life that we actually think are a risk. You know, we overstate the idea that we're going to look embarrassing if we start an online business, or if we put a podcast out, or if we put out a song, or we tell people like, hey, like I'm going to, you know, go out on a limb and change my job. I used to be an accountant, but now I want to do X. We think people are going to go, oh my gosh, that's so terrible. But like we talked about, most people don't really care. And the safety nets that exist in life, whether you're a business owner or whether you're changing jobs or whether you're just pursuing something, are pretty significant now at this point in time. So the actual risk is generally pretty low that something bad is going to happen when it comes to changing life circumstances.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people almost forget that taking that big leap, what the actual reward is happiness and growth.
Yeah.
And that's how people get stuck in cubicles for 8 to 10 hours a day. That's how, you know, you just start going down a path, and then 40 years later, you're living a life filled with regrets because you never took the chance to do something that could have been fulfilling or brought you some type of happiness or achieved some type of dream that you had.
This is something that I probably could have added on to the things that we learned this year, but so many people do a specific act with the idea of getting to an intermediary thing that will get them to happiness. So you start a business. Why? Because I want to make money. Why? Because if I have more money, then I will have financial security. Okay, and then what does that mean? Well, that means that I can like buy a house and buy a car. Mm-hmm. Well, what does that mean? That means then I'm happy. Oh, okay.
Okay.
So what you really want is you want to be happy. Mm-hmm. But is there a way that we can like maybe not necessarily go through some of those hoops in the middle to become happy?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I just do something that I love, and that's like good enough for me. You know, again, it's difficult to explain that to people, but that is one of the things, especially in this business. I tell people, look, we're in this business to make money, yes, but we're also in it to be happy. We can go work for someone else and be stressed. Let's do it and do it well, but be happy while doing it. So if we have a bad client, let's get rid of them. We're doing happy, healthy business.
Happy, healthy business. And one of the things, at least on an individual level, for me, is not necessarily making more money, but not needing money as much. So that translates to eliminating as much unnecessary debt as I possibly can from my life, to where I'm not stressed. If I can do that enough, then I won't be stressed out about money anymore.
For sure. 6, there are people out there who are better than you at basically anything. There have been people on this podcast that are more charismatic, more intelligent, better read, more hardworking, and more artistic. Yet we persist. And as Munger said, you don't have to do extraordinary things to achieve extraordinary results. Maybe you also don't need to be an extraordinary person either. I'm sure the valedictorian at my graduation was smart, but I would be surprised to hear they're more successful than me. Don't get overconfident, because there is always someone better at the thing. But maybe you don't need to be the very best at the thing if you can stack skills. You may be the 10,000th best business owner, but you may be the 4,000th best speaker. Combine those two, and you may be one of the top 100 business speakers in the world. Don't dwell on what you don't have or can't do. You may just not be that person. Why would you want to try to be something that you aren't meant to be? Focus on your own skills, talents, and efforts. Stay the course. Maybe there is someone better than you out there. But if you trade for Elon's intelligence, you also have to take on his social skills. There may be someone better right now, but that doesn't mean they'll end up beating you in the long run. The NFL football player right now is better than you at making money, but they may not be in 20 years. Yeah, that was something that I just picked up on while I was doing this podcast. Not to say that I was super overconfident in my skills, but I would speak to people, and then 15 minutes into the conversation, I'd be like, oh, this guy's way more charismatic than me. Mm-hmm. Or like, I want to work for this guy. Jeez. Like, do my employees think that about me? Do they be like, yeah, I want to work for him? And I don't know. You know, I Rob Smith, I just listened to some of his interview this morning. He was an awesome guy, really successful business owner, and he just like jacked me up. I was like, man, I would work for this guy. You know, I would totally work for him. And when we met with Jeremy, we're like, this guy is intense. You know, this guy's more intense than us. Well, he's more intense than me. He's way more competitive than I am. Like, he's calling other restaurateurs, they're calling him and being like, yeah, I don't lose. click, hang up the phone. I was thinking like, that's probably not something I would have done. So there's people out there who are just, you know, they have skills that they're objectively probably better than mine or ours. And you can take that in two ways. You can take that as a bad thing, like, dang, I wish I was more. I wish I was more charismatic. I wish that I was smarter. I wish that I was all of these different things. But you can also look back and say, well, you know what? I've actually accomplished quite a lot of things. Mm-hmm. I've actually stacked a lot of proof behind me that, yeah, you are something, and the skills that you have are enough. And if you can stack the things that you are good at together, I think that I'm well-spoken. I think that I'm smart. I think that I understand business. I'm good at business. I think I'm good at seeing trends. Oh, okay. Well, maybe you will be a pretty successful business owner doing all of those things, but you got to stack those together and focus on what you're good at, but don't dwell on the things that you aren't good at. Yeah.
And I think this is one that I see a lot in my life, just being around creative people in general, because there's a fine line between being inspired by somebody and being envious of somebody.
Yep.
And what's that? It's a classic saying, comparison is the thief of joy.
Yep.
So
it's very true.
Yeah. And it's super easy. And I've caught myself kind of tipping towards the wrong side of that equation a couple times in my life for various reasons. But yeah, sometimes you gotta just set stuff down, realize that, yeah, there's always going to be bigger fish out there, but they're not you. And just, you know, focus on yourself. Just, was that Dory saying? Just keep swimming.
Just keep swimming. But at the same time, again, you know, those extremely successful or creative types, it's like, well, do I want everything that they have? You know, like a lot of really creatives are extremely broken people.
Oh,
you know, do I want all of that? You know, do I want to be Van Gogh? Well, you know, he cut his ear off. So you have to take both of those things. And, you know, I think I'm pretty well adjusted and thoughtful, and you know, I think about business in a relatively clear way. Mm-hmm. There's going to be some people out there who have more of something than me, but do they have more of everything? I don't necessarily know that. So I focus on the things that I'm good at. It's not to say don't work on your weaknesses. You can always work on things, but don't dwell on those weaknesses and get bent out of shape because, oh gosh, I'm not as competitive as Jeremy. It's like, hey, well, that's Jeremy's skill set, man. You got yours. Focus on those.
Yeah, and that's kind of the line that once you notice you've crossed, you kind of got to like self-check and bring yourself kind of back to reality a little bit from when you're inspired by somebody and it's driving you to do better yourself.
That's right.
And then being feeling that bummed out, defeated feeling when someone is doing better than you. Like that's when it's just a little bit too much and you should probably like do some self-reflecting.
7, put yourself out there, because if you don't, someone else will, and they may not be as authentic as you. Social media is likely not for everyone. In fact, I think it's probably bad for the brains of 99% of people. But in an attempt to avoid social media, we also avoid doing the exact thing that we wanted with this podcast, giving people helpful advice that may benefit them in the future. And if we didn't put the content out there, someone else was going to fill that void. And there was a good chance that they wouldn't have the same positive intentions. Unfortunately, hucksters don't usually fall into the spotlight. They thrust themselves into it. I see a lot of folks who have already sold on Amazon because they were told at some point it was an easy way to make money. There really aren't any of those. If you want to help people, we need to reach more people. So to reach those, we need to be on social media. For all of its negatives, hopefully we can be a force for some of the positives. And remember, no one cares if you look stupid. It's not for them.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've been harping on this to me. This is something that Esteban told me. This is something a variety of different folks who came on the podcast said. They're like, Alex, man, you got to put yourself out there. You got to put yourself out there. And you know that I'm not that big on social media and I don't really enjoy getting on it. But, you know, we want to help people with this podcast. That's the ultimate goal. Sure, there's some other goals. You know, we want to make money. You know, we want to speak to interesting people. We want to learn ourselves, which is what we're recapping here. Mm-hmm. But the ultimate idea is that we want to help folks. So to help the amount of people that we want, we have to reach all those people. And to reach all those people, we have to push it.
Yeah.
So there's no shame in self-promotion if you have a positive, authentic outlook at the end of that. And, you know, I believe you can do good and do well at the same time. I know not everybody believes in that, but I do. So the more people we can help with our podcast, the more I think we can help ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said earlier, happy, healthy business. That definitely applies here too. And just making sure that we have that North Star just kind of guiding us of what are our intentions? Are they good? Are we, growing ourselves? Are we enjoying what we do? And then having, money and monetizing and having a larger audience as a little bit further down on that list, I think is huge. Because like you said, like there's so many people out there who, if you're not talking to the people that you're talking to about the subjects that you want to talk to them about, you being someone whose intentions are in the right place and has certain knowledge and experience that you can draw from that actually could be helpful to other people, like a snake oil salesman is going to hop in there and try to do something.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, and you said something really important, kind of having that North Star. This also is going to make it far easier for someone to feel very confident putting themselves out there and pushing their message. If I was pushing a product that I didn't fundamentally believe in, like let's say I'm pushing like a sugary soda, and I'm like, I know that this is bad for people. Like at the back of your mind, you're going to go, yeah, I feel kind of slimy about this, because any person that I am able to convince or hook with my marketing, I'm making their life worse. So I feel like we are giving out positive, good, informative, beneficial advice that is going to help people's lives. So let's do it fully. Let's do it with, clean, healthy conscience. Let's put that thing out there. And I think that's a lesson for anyone who's starting a business. If you wouldn't feel like jacked up to get like an additional customer, not just because it helps your pocket, but because you feel like, hey, I'm actually helping this person, and not helping from the perspective of like, oh, I got them the cigarettes that they wanted. If you aren't like, yeah, I made their life fundamentally better, I made them a better human being, I think you need to maybe consider what line of business that you're in. And look, not every business is going to meet that standard of like it makes a person's life better. But I think that if you get to choose what business you go into, why not choose one that you're going to feel good about?
Yeah, for sure. And not everything has to necessarily be geared towards making other people better human beings. But I think what it boils down to is if you know that you're a net negative on somebody, but you're okay with that because you're getting paid, then that can definitely like lead to some pretty dark places.
Definitely. 8, you want to work for people who do it because of their employees, not in spite of them. Unfortunately, there's a narrative out there that business owners are working to pay their employees as little as possible so they can keep the profits to buy a boat or a car. In my experience, that couldn't be further from the truth of most business owners. Sure, there will always be an outlier out there who grabs the headlines, just like there will be an employee who steals, an athlete who cheats, or a crooked cop. Those are the headlineable people who don't make up the reality of the whole. Most business owners genuinely care about their employees and want the best for them. Most will sacrifice their own well-being, dig into their own pockets, and go way out of their way. If you feel like you don't work at a business that does that, you may be at the wrong place. Next interview you go to, ask this question. What does the ownership do to show their employees they care? If they can't answer that question quickly and honestly, what do you think ownership will do when times get hard? We aren't curing cancer at my company, so my giving back is in the form of trying to help our employees. There's an obvious balance there because no one employee is more important than keeping the business alive. But if you lose sight of what and who got you there, you are forgetting an important part. It's fun to win alone. It's a lot more fun to win as a team. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So this is something that a lot of people that I talk to on the podcast hit on, specifically Rob Smith. He goes, Alex, we exited this business, and sometimes I wonder why I want to get back into it. And I said, well, why do you? And he goes, I think we just want to help. We just know we want to get those employees, and we want to help. That's the type of guy that you want to work for, because that person is thinking first about the employees. Yes, he's made it. I'm doing air quotes, but that guy is the type of individual who is not going to screw you over. He's going to be fair. He has a moral compass. He has a conscience. We talked to Jeff Bradshaw, and he talked about all the people that he had at his company, 375 plus employees, how many times he's had to help employees and give them money and pay them out of his own pocket and bend over backwards for them. Those are the type of folks that you want to work for. And I think as a business owner, that's the type of person that you want to be, because those employees, I think, are going to get you farther and give you more to get to your ultimate goals. And hiring is extremely expensive and time consuming. So yeah, if it takes paying an employee $2,000 more per year to stay at your company, think about how much it's going to cost you just to recruit and train and vet, and gosh, just a background check might be $200. So it's like, all right, we already paid for 10% of this just by doing this process, let alone the time it takes to train them and lost productivity. Yeah. So as a business owner, employee focused, as an employee focused on a business owner that actually cares.
Yeah. And as a business owner, I'm sure you can attest to how much turnover actually costs businesses on a yearly basis. It's huge.
Oh, yeah.
Like you pointed out, the retraining, the hiring process, the taxes, everything that you have to do from scratch with a brand new employee is going to add up if your turnover rate is like 80, 90%. I've seen some places that are over 100% turnover rate within a year. And it's insane. But yeah, I think it just boils down to, again, just good leadership, because it takes all personality types to be out there and create a workforce, but you can spot bad and or toxic leadership very quickly. And this is something that I saw even back when I was in the military, and just kind of learning and what leadership meant to me coming up through the ranks, and then deciding what type of leader I wanted to be once I was in those positions. And yeah, it's something you kind of always got to be on your guard about.
And one of the things that a reason I bring that up is because so many people that I have heard, whether that be out in the media or people you talk to, they're really down on capitalism, and they're like, these people are just like, knocking down the little guy. And I'm like, well, wait, who are you talking about when you say that? Because I need you to be specific. Like, if your answer is Jeff Bezos because he just, he rocks his employees into the floor, I'm like, well, that they give you healthcare covered on day one. They give you PTO on day one. They'll pay for your college to reimburse you for college. Literally, they have ads where they're like, we want you to use this as a stepping stone. We want you to work here 3 years and get your college degree and move on. Okay. So I'm like, okay, well, is that the company that you're down on? Well, yeah, because they I don't know, they'll work you really hard. I'm like, well, they're giving you a lot.
They are giving you a lot.
So again, you can find these little anecdotes and these stories, but I think generally you're not talking about the plumbing contractor down the street who has 6 employees and he's just trying to take care of them. Now, does he pay as much as everyone else in town? Well, if that's your only metric for success, who pays the most, well, then you're going to wind up thinking that some pharmaceutical sales company is the best company in, Ohio. And it's
those Sacklers are great.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sure the Sacklers paid really great bonuses, but is that your measure of success of a company? It's how much they pay, or is it their ability to care for their employees and provide a work environment where those folks feel cared for and they feel empowered to be a better person thereafter?
Well, yeah, it was like you said at the beginning, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And sure. If you're a team member on somebody's under somebody who wants to go fast, you can see it. They're pushing you past your limits. They are taking all the credit when they shouldn't be. They're doing all these things to kind of be the lone wolf. But a good boss is going to make it feel like a team, make it feel like a home. They're going to listen to your input. They might even implement your input if it's a good idea, but it's all about that give and take. And being a good leader, going as a team, going far, is a two-way street between the team and the leadership.
There's this quote that you can't always quite see intelligence, but you can spot stupid a mile away.
Oh, heck yeah.
That's kind of like leadership. You can't always explain like what makes a good leader, but you can spot a bad one a mile away.
Oh, for sure. 100%.
All right, 9. You have to have a why to do anything of significance. Everyone wants to get in shape, but over 50% of Americans are obese. Everyone wants to be wealthy, but most Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Everyone wants to make changes in their life, as New Year's resolutions would show, but most people never end up making those changes stick. Enter the why question. If your why is strong enough, you will make a change, possibly even the most difficult ones. This is personified into the culture with the breakup body. Only a significant change in life circumstances do we get jarred into making it. The why becomes, I want to show them how great I am. The idea isn't just to have a why, it's that it can be created. Michael Jordan created enemies, real or imagined, throughout his career for additional motivation. People often do this by signing up for a race. You have to train, go out and get in shape, and prepare. The why becomes obvious. We can use this idea to create whys in our own life. Schedule a beach vacation 6 months from now, and you should probably start training. Maybe a pretty friend will be attending a wedding at the end of the year. Start preparing mentally and physically. Whether the why is real or imagined, it's not as important as having one. Believing the why is enough. Even a negative emotion can be used as some of the most powerful whys, but use it with caution. It can be helpful for a few years, but become toxic to you after time. If you want to accomplish anything hard, having a why is an important aspect in sticking to it. A man with a why can endure almost anyhow.
That's a big one. That made me think of, again, Jeremy, when he was talking about his KFC neighbor. And you asked him, if he was a nice guy, would you still have like gone after him that hard? And he's like, well, maybe. Yeah.
I thought about Dan Blanton. So Dan obviously got out of kind of the depths of despair and drug abuse. Mm-hmm. And we asked him, how'd you do that? And he said, well, a lot of my friends couldn't do it, or they didn't do it. But I got out of it. And the reason that I was able to do so was I had a why. I had my stepbrother, who I missed his birth. And I felt just devastated. And I went, I'm missing the birth of my brother for this drug. And I think that broke him. And he went, yeah, like at there, I was just decided. He's like, it wasn't instant, but it was pretty fast that I decided I have a why now, and I'm going to clean up my act. A lot of his friends, he said, didn't have a why. They just they wanted to do it, but they didn't have the why. Yeah.
And that was such a good episode too. I love Dan. So many lessons to be learned from that. And his story is just hugely powerful. And that is something that I've always kind of like known, but I haven't really put it into words, is find your why, until I met him and, was there for that episode.
Yeah. And the why can be real, like Dan's, or as I stated, it can be kind of imagined or made up. You can set a goal out into the future and say, I'm preparing for this goal. You now have a why, but you created it. It's right. A manufactured why. Like I said, you can set a beach vacation with you and your boys like in August of 2024 and be like, I got to be shredded in August. Well, why? It's like, well, I got to be shredded for the vacation. Even if the vacation gets called off, you still went through it believing that it was real.
Sure.
And doing the work that it took, because you have this thing out there in the future that like, I'm working towards this thing.
So, that kind of brings up an interesting question, because you could have a why, but that why could be temporary.
Yeah.
So do you think that there's different qualities of whys for people?
Yeah, there's definitely different qualities of why. Again, that breakup body, that's like a short-term why. You're probably not still like going hard 7 years after the breakup, like, I'll show her. It's like, no, you probably forgot about that. But that still could be a catalyst for getting you into fitness. And then
Sure.
your why eventually transitions to, you know what, I do this for me.
For real, yeah.
So, again, it's just like reading. Initially, my why was I want to read 12 books in 1 year. It's a goal that I set. But now my why has shifted to I believe this is making me smarter. And because of that, I am going to go out and do the thing. You know, in future, the why might change to I want to be more well-read when I speak to guests. So it's just a growing and adapting thing, but I think it all starts with having that why.
Yeah. Like one thing that I'm kind of drawn back to is when I left my very corporate, very well-paying office job back in 2022. And at the time, my why was I was miserable.
Yeah.
This job was literally stealing the soul right out of my body. But even then, that was a temporary why, because now I've left my job and I'm pursuing photography. I'm doing whatever, you know, all of these other things that fulfill me. So it's like, all right, well, what's my why because of that? And I think my permanent why is I don't want to reach retirement age and wonder where my life went.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's this funny thing that you've probably heard me talk about on the podcast before, the region beta paradox, in that if you were a quarter mile away from something, you would just walk. But if you were a mile away, you would drive. But you would actually get to the thing that's a mile away faster because you drove instead of walk. If you live in an apartment that has a little bit of mold, it's probably not a big deal. If it has an enormous amount of mold, you're like, I have to move. If you work at a job that you really dislike, but it has good benefits and good pay, you might survive. Mm-hmm. If it's really bad and it has shit pay, shit benefits, you're like, I need to get out of here. So in that, if things were a little bit worse, they would actually call you into action. But because things are all right, you refuse to make that change that you actually need to make.
Oh yeah, and I was making good money. I had health benefits. I had PTO. I had all of these things. I, was doing some cool things there, enough cool things that kept me there for like 4 years, a little over 4 years. But it was that just creeping amount of just BS that I had to deal with, and just like the 4 gray walls that were just mind numbing, and then punching in numbers on a spreadsheet, stuff that just definitely wasn't me. That was just, after 4 years, it had built up so much in me that I just miserable. And my why at that point was just get out. Just don't look at all the nice shiny things that they're offering you. Don't look at the raise that they, offered you when you put in your 2 weeks. Just get out. It's a trap for you.
I dig it, Steve. So to recap, man, we got 9 things that we worked on learning this year. Mm-hmm. I think made an impact on us and are going to continue to make an impact. It's the fast way is the slow way. When everyone zigs, you may want to zag. Mm-hmm. Learning how to have hard conversations is a superpower. Reading is essential. Most humans have a terrible time understanding risk to reward. There are people out there who are better than you at almost anything. Put yourself out there, because if you don't, someone else will. Work for someone who does it for their employees, not in spite of them. And you have to have a why to do anything of significance.
I like it.
Appreciate it, man. It was a good year. We learned a lot, and hopefully we're going to learn even more in 2023.
2024?
Hopefully we learn more in 24 than we learned in 2023, because we couldn't even learn what year it was this time.
I'm looking forward to 2024, and I appreciate you bringing me on. I'm happy to be here.
Excited to have you, man. We're looking for big things next year. Let's do it.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.